Ladies and gentlemen, can I have a few glasses clinked? Ladies and gentlemen, can I have a few more glasses clinked? Thank you very much. Good evening. We are going to start the evening with the singing of America the Beautiful, 2 verses. The verses are printed in your program here a couple of pages back. And now that you've been seated, will you please stand and we'll join in singing America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of gray, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet who stern in passion's stress, a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex Pollock, AEI's very own singing banker. And thank you to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2011 annual dinner and Irving Kristol Lecture of the American Enterprise Institute. I'm Arthur Brooks, president of AEI. And it's a thrill to see so many of our friends here at the dinner. I'm so appreciative to all of you for coming. It would take at least an hour to list every prominent individual in this room, and you'll appreciate the fact that I'm not going to do that. But I would like to pay a little bit of special attention to one special group who is with us here tonight. We all have great appreciation for America's armed forces. Sunday's victory in Pakistan reminds us what we are up against in the war on terror and the many who sacrificed to keep us safe. It also gives us an opportunity to express our admiration to the members of the AEI community, Vice President Cheney, General Jack Keane, and our national security advisors, among others, who have devoted their careers to keeping America safe and strong. But we also have with us here tonight a group of wounded warriors, servicemen and women who were wounded in the line of duty for America in our conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'd like to tell you who they are. Sergeant Major Rocky Chapala, Master Sergeant Laura Paz, Staff Sergeant Stephanie Mason, Hospital Corpsman Max Roan, and Hospital Corpsman Edward Bonfiglio. It's an honor to have these patriots with us here tonight as a reminder to all of us what true courage really means. This evening's program will center on AEI's Irving Kristol Lecture, delivered by Professor Martin Feldstein, the winner of this year's Irving Kristol Award, which is AEI's highest scholarly honor. Marty is a longtime friend of AEI, a member of our Council of Academic Advisors, and one of America's very most distinguished economists. James Q. Wilson is going to introduce Marty Feldstein here in a moment, but first, I want to give you a new addition to this year's annual dinner program. Many of you have been involved with AEI for years and years. Some of you are new to what we do. One question that I get quite frequently is whether or not we should say something about not just the what of AEI, but the why of AEI. Why are we doing the work that we do every day? And so before I turn the podium over to Jim Wilson, I'd like you to watch a short film with me that we've just completed, a film about how AEI's community of scholars and supporters are making a real difference in the world of public policy. The founders of our country believed that they were creating the freest country in the history of the world. That actually meant creating a system where people could practice liberty. It wasn't just a theoretical concept. We need a system that rewards freedom, that increases individual opportunity, that makes it easier and better and more fun to be an entrepreneur. Well, that system is the free enterprise system. We need institutions that can protect the ideas of our founders in our work lives, and AEI is that place. AEI is a community of scholars and supporters. Since 1938, we've been dedicated to three principles: maximizing liberty, increasing individual opportunity, and strengthening the free enterprise system. We're going to hear from three scholars now that are living every day the vision of AEI's founders, to have impact on the policy debate in a way that truly expresses their values.
One of the easiest areas to get people talking to you about it that we do at AEI is education. You're doing K-12 education, you're doing colleges. People have got a million things they want to say to you. This hits everybody, every day, right where they live. And I just am lucky enough to get to spend my time thinking about it and writing about it and engaging in efforts to improve it.
This is more than just Rick Hess. This is more than just AEI. This is about true education policy reform.
Rick Hess has been an incredible asset to the work that we've done here at DC Public Schools. He just is so easy to talk to, is open, and is willing to consider whatever it takes for kids. And he's helped me see the other side of many issues, and I think that is what is necessary if we're going to move forward with education reform in this country.
There's no other place that's getting this kind of work done.
We're at a crossroads in America where the federal budget is out of control, there are problems around the world, and Americans need the tools and the information to decide what to do about that. And that's the role that AEI plays.
Andrew Biggs is a real geek, but he's a geek who knows what he's talking about.
I'm trying to help Americans understand a lot of things that are very difficult to understand. How does Social Security work? Are public sector pensions really underfinanced? Are public sector workers really overpaid? And if so, by how much?
He's one of those people that we, who are policymakers in Congress, look to for ideas and advice on how to fix these country's problems.
We only get one chance to get this right.
There's no question that the work that he's done has helped to inform a lot of the changes that will end up happening coming forward, and I hope that they come sooner rather than later because our debt clock is ticking.
Andrew Biggs is one of those trailblazers who is at the forefront of what is necessary to fix our social safety net, and in particular, fix Social Security.
My goal is very simply to do everything that I can to help America prevail in its ongoing wars and to help promote American national security against enemies who are thinking about how to kill us every single day.
You'd be surprised how many people are not willing to win a war that we're prosecuting. And Fred is all over it. If we're going to fight a war, we should win it.
This is an organization that is determined to have an effect on policy and to help guide American policy in the direction of guaranteeing freedom throughout the world, guaranteeing free enterprise, guaranteeing the American way of life as we have seen it and have defended it for more than half a century at this organization.
There's 25 million people in Iraq and Afghanistan. who owe the existence they have now, in part, to Fred Kagan. That's an extraordinary thing in of itself.
The one that I turn to make certain that I know exactly what the approach should be and have all of the information, I go to Fred.
What I discovered about Fred is I knew he was an intellectual, but I didn't know he was a man of courage. He's deceptive as all get out, because he's one of the toughest guys I've ever met in my life.
AEI is made up of about 50 full-time scholars, 150 staff, and approximately 800 donors. This 1,000 or so people is small enough that we all know each other, but powerful enough that we can change the debates. What we're trying to achieve, and effectively what is the moral promise of AEI in the free enterprise system, is self-realization through earned success. It is service to others by creating jobs, opportunity, and growth, and having the wherewithal to be charitable people through our private means and not just with other people's money. And basic fairness, which is rewarding merit as opposed simply to redistributing resources through the government. Those are the moral promises of free enterprise, and those are the moral promises of AEI.
Thank you, Arthur, for that very interesting video about the work of AEI with which I and so many people in this room have been associated for so long. Professor Martin Feldstein, who ought to have won the Nobel Prize in Economics by now, will have to settle, for the moment, with the Kristol lectureship at AEI. As you know, Marty is a professor of economics at Harvard, and for many decades was president of the National Bureau of Economics Research, and he chaired the Council of Economic Advisors during part of the Reagan administration. You know that. Let me tell you now a few things that you may not know. When he arrived at the Council of Economic Advisors, he brought with him 3 young and unknown economists to work on its staff. They were Larry Summers, Larry Lindsay, and Paul Krugman. By that act, Marty became the king of intellectual diversity, or if you're a Catholic, as is our president, perhaps the Pope of intellectual diversity. No, Pope Feldstein doesn't sound quite right. You may be impressed with the intellectual honesty with which Douglas Elmendorf has directed the Council, the Congressional Budget Office, has pursued that agency's mandate. Doug was Marty's student. If you are inclined to take a conspiratorial view of politics, you will be relieved to learn that Marty is a member of the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Conference. As you conspiracy lovers know, these groups meet secretly to run the world. It would be nice if they actually did. To me, it would be helpful if Marty Feldstein ran the world. I don't really mean that we should have a contest for that job. The somebody who ran the world would probably come from the United Nations. Marty often thinks as I do. I love a statement he once made, quote, "When it comes to monetary policy, I want to think that there is someone with sound judgment at the controls for the same reason I want pilots on the planes that I fly." End of quotation. Since Marty does not much like what economists call QE2, the effort by the Fed to inject more money into our system, it is possible that he might not settle for having any pilot fly the plane. He would want a good one. But that is about as far as his skill at macroeconomics will take him. When it comes to financial markets, he once said that, quote, "Science cannot replace judgment, because no matter how good the science gets, there are problems that inevitably depend on judgment, on art, and on a feel for these markets." End of quote. The sad history of a firm called Long-Term Capital Management testifies to the limits of science and the absence of judgment. Marty Feldstein combines deep wisdom, clear thought, and practical experience. I am delighted to introduce him to you as the 2011 Kristol Lecturer.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored by this award and by the opportunity to deliver this year's Kristol Lecture. I knew Irving Kristol for over 30 years, and I admired him as a public intellectual who was devoted to the development of ideas that could shape public policy in favorable ways. Irving also played an important part in my own life. I met him when I was a first-year assistant professor at Harvard. Someone had told him I had some novel ideas about reforming health insurance, and he encouraged me to write about them for the public interest. Over the years, the public interest had a small but influential group of readers who shaped conservative thinking and action about domestic policies. I think we should all be grateful to Irving for creating the public interest and for his devotion to maintaining its relevance and its impact. I'm also honored to be standing here tonight because of my admiration for the American Enterprise Institute. Many years ago, at a time when conservative ideas were scarce, particularly in the academic community, AEI brought rigorous debate to public policy issues. I saw many of those ideas come to fruition when I was in the Reagan White House. AEI continues to be a major contributor to public policy. We are all better off because of what AEI has done and what it continues to do. Let me begin now with an important and to many people disturbing economic fact. Sometime in the next 15 years, China's economy will be bigger than that of the United States. That presents a major economic challenge, military challenge, and political challenge. Those challenges and America's response are my subject this evening. China is still a very poor country with real per capita income less than 1/6 of the US level. But China's population of 1.3 billion people is more than 4 times ours, and its per capita income is growing rapidly. That makes it inevitable that the real value of China's total GDP, the total value of goods and services produced in China adjusted to US prices, will soon exceed America's. China's real GDP is now about 2/3 of ours. Over the past 3 decades, China has been growing at a 10% real rate, while we've been growing at a rate of about 3%. If that continues, China's GDP will exceed ours within just 6 years. But even if China's growth rate slows substantially while ours accelerates, China's GDP will catch up within 15 years. So China's future place as the world's largest economy is virtually inevitable. I wouldn't have believed that when I first visited China 30 years ago. China was then a desperately poor country in which the heavy hand of its communist government reduced productivity and prevented growth. It was illegal to hire employees or to own production equipment. Agriculture was still collectivized. But all of that was about to change as the Chinese government began to recognize property rights and to welcome entrepreneurship. Today's China is a strange mixture of entrepreneurial capitalism and state-owned enterprises. China's real GDP is now about 20 times what it was when I visited there in 1982. The Chinese people have taken seriously the advice of Deng Xiaoping when he said, "To get rich is glorious." It's too bad that that sentiment is not shared by some of our own senior leaders. But here is my important point. China's imminent overtaking of America's GDP does not diminish our ability to grow and to raise our standard of living. Even when China's total GDP catches up to ours, our per capita income will be much higher than China's, and the United States can continue to have the highest standard of living in the world if we pursue sound policies here at home. But China's total GDP does have important implications for America's military and trade policies. The United States and China now have relatively good political relations, and China is not a current military threat. Today's leaders in China are focused on achieving economic growth, raising domestic living standards, and preserving internal stability. Tensions over Taiwan, Tibet, and the South China Sea are being dealt with diplomatically. But China is building a serious military capability. China is already a nuclear power, developing a navy with global reach, acquiring an aircraft carrier, has anti-ship missiles, has demonstrated a stealth fighter plane, and clearly has sophisticated ability in cyberspace. The strength and quality of China's military is not currently up to U.S. standards, but no one doubts that China's defense budget will grow with its GDP. While the U.S. political system has forced defense spending to shrink from 9% of GDP in the Kennedy years to less than 5% now, China doesn't face the same political limits on its defense spending. What are the implications for America's defense policy? The key is to focus on the future generations of Chinese civilian and military leaders. The United States should maintain a military capability such that no future generation of Chinese leaders will consider a military challenge to the United States or using military force to intimidate the United States or our allies. China's future military spending and weapons development will depend on China's perception of what the U.S. is doing and what we will do. If we show a determination to remain invincible, China will not waste resources on challenging us in an arms race. It is important that our Asian friends, like Japan, Korea, Singapore, Australia, see the commitment of the United States to remain strong and to remain present in Asia. Their relations with China and with us depend on what they can expect of America's future military strength. The Navy has a particularly important role to play, including the Navy's presence to enforce freedom of the seas, naval visits to Asian ports, and joint exercises with other navies. We cannot postpone implementing a policy of future military superiority. We have to work now to develop the weapon systems of the future. We have to maintain the industrial and technological capacity to produce those weapons. We have to make it clear by our budgets and by our actions that we are the global force now and will continue to be that in the future. While reducing fiscal deficits is very important, that task should not deflect the federal government from achieving its primary responsibility, defending this country and our global interests both now and in the future. President Obama's proposal to shrink defense spending to less than 4% of GDP in the current decade threatens our capabilities and sends the wrong message about our future strength. As we think about our military role in Asia and elsewhere, we have to ask ourselves whether we have a moral obligation to defend our allies, or is our appropriate military policy just limited to protecting our trade, our foreign investments, and our access to oil. There are those who say the United States should not be the global policeman. But if not us, who? As the only democratic superpower with the ability to defend and to punish, do we not have a moral obligation to be willing to use that power? There are also those who say we cannot afford to be the global policeman. But should we really be deterred when the cost of our entire military budget, including the actions in Iraq and Afghanistan, is now less than 5% of our GDP? There is no danger of bankrupting ourselves by so-called imperial overreach when we spend less than 5% of GDP on defense. And while there is certainly waste in military procurement, that is unfortunately inherent in the congressional appropriation process. Cutting the defense budget would reduce our military capabilities rather than just removing waste. Let me turn now from military issues to the challenge that China's growth poses for America's trade and investment policies. China has become the major customer for companies around the world. It's a striking fact that General Motors now sells more vehicles in China than in the United States. Global companies also want to produce in China, to be close to potential buyers and also to hire employees at more favorable wages than they can in the United States or Europe or Japan. This will remain true, even though rising wages in China will erode some of that cost advantage. The increasing size of the Chinese market creates a challenge for U.S. trade policy and for our foreign policy. China will inevitably want to leverage its trade and investment relations in pursuit of its political, economic, and military aims. The best way to prevent Asia becoming a closed trading bloc and a China-centered political coalition is for the United States to expand free trade agreements and other trade arrangements with the countries of Asia. Recent experience shows some of the risks that could lie ahead for American firms in China. One example is the Chinese policy to require foreign firms that manufacture in China to transfer their technology to Chinese partners. American CEOs with whom I spoke about this were outraged, but felt they had no choice since they wanted to produce and sell in China. Pressure from the United States and other governments eventually caused a modification of this policy, but frankly, it's not clear how this will evolve. Although China is bound by WTO rules, policies of limiting access for government purchases and requiring technology sharing are not technically prevented. As China flexes its economic muscles, the United States and other countries will have to develop a strategy to protect the rights of our firms in China. I'll turn now to the challenge at home. At the beginning of my remarks, I emphasized that China's eventual overtaking of U.S. total GDP does not diminish America's ability to grow and to remain the greatest economy in the world, the country in which people around the world want to come, the country that is the global leader in science and culture and creative industry. Our growth and our standard of living depend on what we do and not on what the Chinese do. Although our economy has had its cyclical ups and downs, our 2.3% growth rate of real per capita income during my life has been enough to raise real per capita income more than 5-fold during those years. In today's prices, per capita GDP rose from just over $9,000 in 1939 to more than $47,000 last year. The challenge is to maintain that rate of growth into the future or to raise it even higher. Small differences in the growth rate can mean a great deal. If the average growth rate of GDP per capita had been 1% less during my lifetime, our income level today would be only half of what it actually is. And if we could have grown at 1% more per year, our incomes now would have twice today's buying power. So preserving or increasing our economic growth will have a powerful effect on our nation's future. I fear that the current policy path will not permit strong future growth. If we want to achieve satisfactory growth, we need to shift to more pro-growth policies. The key to our standard of living is productivity, the quantity of goods and services produced per hour of employee work. The faster the growth of productivity, the faster will be the rise in real incomes and of our standard of living. The growth of productivity depends on the quality of our workforce, the growth of our capital stock, the effectiveness of management, and the introduction of new technology and new products. Each of these is influenced by government policies, by taxes, regulation, government programs, and fiscal deficits. While government policies cannot produce the creative drive that generates exciting new products, products that make American ingenuity the envy of the world, bad government policies can stifle that creativity and make it more difficult to convert new ideas into real products at prices that millions of people around the world can enjoy. You may have noticed that I have not said anything about international competitiveness. That wasn't an oversight. Our nation's ability to export and to replace imports with American-made goods and services doesn't raise our standard of living unless it is the result of higher productivity. Productivity is fundamental, not competitiveness. Indeed, raising America's competitiveness can actually depress our standard of living if it's not the result of increased productivity, if it is the result of a weaker dollar. If the Chinese raise the value of the renminbi, as the current and previous administrations have urged, that would increase our ability to compete with China, both at home and abroad. But the rise in the renminbi would increase the real cost of everything we buy from China. For the American public as a whole, a stronger renminbi would mean a lower standard of living. So let's stop focusing on competitiveness and focus instead on raising our productivity, the amount that we produce per worker. A fundamental source of productivity is the quality of our workforce, and education is the key to that quality. American higher education is very good. That reflects our tradition of independent private universities and the national market in higher education in which those institutions compete for students and faculty. The real problem with our education system is in the primary and secondary schools. The problem is not just in poor neighborhoods and central cities. American students as a whole do poorly on standardized international tests of science and mathematics. We know the primary reasons for this failure: the lack of choice for students and their parents, and the monopoly power of teachers' unions. The result is that teaching doesn't attract talented college graduates, and that schools don't weed out poor teachers. Let's hope that the accumulating evidence on the positive effects of school choice and the changes that computer technology will make possible in education will bring the needed reforms. Our productivity growth also reflects the way that the government policies, especially tax policies, influence what students do when they leave school. High tax rates affect the occupations they choose, the effort they make on the job, their decisions to change jobs in pursuit of better opportunity, and their willingness to take risks in pursuit of a good idea. The entrepreneurial drive is strong in America, but it can be suppressed by high tax rates and complex regulations. Marginal tax rates on incremental earnings are too high. A middle-income couple making $80,000 a year now faces a marginal tax rate of 45% on every extra dollar they earn, because of the combination of the federal income tax, the payroll tax, and state taxes. But while 45% is a typical marginal tax rate, all of the personal taxes combined collect less than 15% of GDP. The reason we have such high marginal tax rates to collect 15% of GDP is that the tax code is full of special features that reduce tax revenue. Those features are really forms of government spending that have been built into the tax code. If Congress wants to reduce government spending, it has to look beyond the outlay side of the budget to the spending that is embedded in the tax code. Tax credits for buying hybrid cars or solar panels are just like government spending to subsidize those purchases. The exclusion from employees' taxable income of employer payments for health insurance is just like government spending to subsidize health insurance. And there are many, many more examples. These special features, known as tax expenditures, add more to the deficit each year than all the non-defense discretionary spending in the budget. And once enacted, tax expenditures do not face annual review as part of an appropriation process. Although limiting the use of tax expenditures would produce additional tax revenue, it is very different from other revenue increases. It doesn't raise marginal tax rates, doesn't discourage work or entrepreneurship, and doesn't tax saving and risk-taking. It is really a reduction in government spending, not a tax increase. It's clear that we need tax reform to lower marginal tax rates and improve incentives for saving and investment. Just one example is the tax on capital gains. In the printed version of these remarks that you'll receive at the end of the evening, I talk about other aspects of tax reform, but I will spare you that now. The capital gains tax, though, not only discourages saving and risk-taking, but also locks investors into existing investments rather than freeing their capital to invest in new ventures. It's also a very unfair tax, a double tax on retained earnings that have already been taxed at the corporate level, a tax on nominal gains that result from inflation, and a tax on all gains without allowing a full deduction for all losses. Reforming our tax system should be combined with bringing our budget deficits under control. The unprecedented deficits now projected for the current decade and beyond will absorb most of private saving, crowding out private investment and keeping the United States dependent on unreliable capital inflows from abroad. We cannot eliminate those deficits and the resulting explosion of the national debt by faster economic growth or by inflation. We have to slow the growth of spending, particularly the so-called entitlement programs for the future aged. The right solution is to provide a basic level of tax-financed Social Security benefits and of medical care for retirees, and then to encourage individuals to supplement those benefits by saving more in their pre-retirement years. Reducing spending also means cutting the spending done through the tax code. Limiting those tax expenditures would allow raising revenue to reduce the budget deficit while at the same time lowering marginal tax rates. All of this is a tough political agenda, but it is doable. It's worth remembering that after World War II, we reduced our national debt from 109% of GDP in 1946 to 46% of GDP in 1960. We did this by avoiding any growth of the government's debt during those years. That is, by balancing deficit years with surplus years. The combination of real growth and moderate inflation was then enough to have the ratio of debt to GDP in just 15 years. We did that then, and we can do it again. And we should insist that reducing poverty, not limiting inequality, is an appropriate goal of policy. While a fair distribution of tax burdens is important, we should reject the spiteful egalitarianism of those who would use high tax rates to reduce income inequality. If we do these things, if we do the things that need to be done, improving education, reforming taxes, reducing government deficits, stabilizing the government debt, and eliminating damaging regulations, if we do these things, we will unleash the rising incomes that American creativity and a free enterprise system can produce. Kate and I have a new grandson, born just 6 months ago. So I think about what life could be like when young Otto is 30 years old. Just maintaining the historic 2.3% a year rate of growth of per capita income would, in just those 30 years, double the level of individual real incomes in America. And when Otto is as old as I am now, real incomes would be 5 times what they are today. The average per capita GDP of $45,000 today would be $90,000 in today's prices 30 years from now, and more than $200,000 in today's prices after 70 years. Those income levels would make so many things possible that are not possible today. Otto and his generation would be able to take advantage of the remarkable improvements in healthcare that science will bring, spending a larger share of income on healthcare while still having very large amounts left to spend on everything else. They would be able to devote much more income to education, to cultural activities, to the environment, to maintaining America's security, and to virtually eliminating poverty. But all of that will only happen if we act now to make it so. That is America's challenge. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you for your service to American public policy, to the economics profession, to the American Enterprise Institute. This calls to a close the entertainment portion, or this portion of the entertainment. This gives you an idea of what we consider entertainment at the American Enterprise Institute. Please enjoy your dinner. After that, please enjoy the fellowship, the music, and the dancing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the nice words. Thank you again for this opportunity.